High in the frozen silence of the Himalayas, where oxygen is thin and survival itself is a daily battle, two of the world's most powerful nations stand face to face. No gunfire echoes through these mountains, yet the tension is deadly. Soldiers patrol icy ridges at altitudes higher than commercial airplanes fly, carrying not only weapons but the weight of history, pride, and unresolved conflict. This is not a war remembered through victory parades or peace treaties. This is a conflict that never truly ended. This is the story of China and India and the border dispute that still threatens the stability of all Asia. To understand why China and India clash today, we must first travel back centuries before modern nation-states existed, to a time when empires rose and fell, borders were fluid, and maps were drawn not by satellites, but by ambition. The Himalayan region, vast and forbidding, long served as a natural barrier between civilizations. For thousands of years, trade, culture, and religion passed through its narrow passes. Buddhism traveled from India to China, silk moved westward, and ideas crossed borders long before armies did. Yet despite this interaction, no clear political boundary was ever firmly established across these mountains. When the British Empire expanded across the Indian subcontinent in the 19th century, it brought with it a new obsession: defining borders. Colonial administrators, sitting in distant offices, attempted to draw lines across some of the most inhospitable terrain on Earth. One such line, drawn in 1914 during the Simla Convention, would later become one of the most controversial borders in modern history. Known as the McMahon Line, it was negotiated between British India and Tibetan representatives. China, which considered Tibet an integral part of its territory, rejected the agreement entirely. To Beijing, the line was illegal. To India, it became the legal boundary. Thus, a dispute was born even before either modern China or independent India existed. The year 1947 marked a turning point. India emerged from British rule as an independent nation, scarred by partition but driven by hope. Jawaharlal Nehru, India's first prime minister, envisioned a peaceful Asia led by newly free nations working together. Just 2 years later, in 1949, the People's Republic of China was founded under Mao Zedong after decades of civil war. China, too, sought to reclaim what it saw as its historical territories and restore national pride after a century of humiliation at the hands of foreign powers. Initially, relations between the two Asian giants were warm. India was among the first countries to recognize the new Chinese government. The slogan, "Hindi Chini Bye Bye," meaning Indians and Chinese are brothers, echoed through diplomatic speeches. Both nations spoke of anti-imperialism, cooperation, and Asian solidarity. But beneath the smiles, the seeds of conflict were already growing. The turning point came with Tibet. In 1950, China moved troops into Tibet, asserting full control over the region. For China, this was a matter of sovereignty. For India, Tibet had long served as a strategic buffer between itself and China. Suddenly, Chinese forces were positioned directly along India's northern frontier. The border, once remote and theoretical, became immediate and real. As China consolidated its control over Tibet, it began constructing infrastructure, including a road linking Xinjiang and Tibet that passed through Aksai Chin, a vast, high-altitude plateau claimed by India but controlled by China. India discovered this road only years later, sparking outrage in New Delhi. From India's perspective, Chinese troops had entered its territory. From China's view, it was building within its own borders. The absence of a mutually agreed boundary turned infrastructure into provocation. Throughout the 1950s, negotiations failed repeatedly. Maps were exchanged, talks were held, but neither side was willing to compromise on what it believed was sovereign land. India adopted a forward policy, establishing small outposts in disputed areas to assert its claims. China saw this as encroachment. Tensions rose quietly, far from the public eye, in snowbound valleys few civilians had ever seen. Then, in October 1962, the conflict erupted into open war. Chinese forces launched coordinated attacks across two main sectors, the Western Front in Aksai Chin and the Eastern Front in what is now Arunachal Pradesh. Indian troops, poorly equipped for high-altitude warfare and unprepared for the scale of the assault, were overwhelmed. Within weeks, Chinese forces advanced deep into contested territory. The war was short, brutal, and shocking. Indian soldiers fought with courage but faced logistical nightmares, insufficient winter clothing, limited ammunition, and impossible supply lines. China, having prepared meticulously, achieved rapid success. Then, just as suddenly as it began, China declared a unilateral ceasefire and withdrew from some areas while retaining control over Aksai Chin. The message was clear. China had demonstrated its strength, but the border issue was far from resolved. The 1962 war left deep scars in India's national psyche. It shattered Nehru's vision of Asian brotherhood and exposed weaknesses in India's military preparedness. For China, the war reinforced its control over strategic territories and sent a warning to regional rivals. Yet no formal peace treaty was ever signed. Instead, the two sides settled into an uneasy standoff, divided by what became known as the Line of Actual Control, or LAC, a de facto boundary that exists on the ground but is not clearly defined on maps. For decades after the war, relations remained cold. Diplomatic contact was minimal, and mistrust ran deep. But by the late 1980s, both nations recognized the need to stabilize their relationship. Economic reforms in China and India's own liberalization efforts created new incentives for cooperation. Agreements were signed to maintain peace along the border, restrict troop movements, and prevent escalation. Trade increased, diplomatic visits resumed, and the idea of conflict faded from public consciousness. Yet the border itself remained unresolved. The line of actual control was never jointly clarified. Patrols from both sides continued to operate based on their own interpretations of where the line lay. In some areas, these perceptions overlapped, creating zones where confrontations were inevitable. Soldiers faced each other not across fences or walls, but across invisible lines drawn differently in different minds. In the 21st century, the stakes grew higher. China's rapid economic rise transformed it into a global superpower. India, too, emerged as a major regional force with growing ambitions. Infrastructure development accelerated on both sides of the border. Roads, airstrips, and logistics hubs pushed ever closer to disputed areas. What was once remote wilderness became strategically vital terrain. Incidents began to increase. Patrols confronted each other, banners were unfurled, stones were thrown, and tempers flared. In 2017, a tense standoff at Doklam, near the India-Bhutan-China tri-junction, brought the two nations to the brink of another conflict. For over 2 months, soldiers stood face to face, neither willing to back down. Though the crisis was eventually diffused, it revealed how fragile peace along the border truly was. Then came 2020. In the Galway Valley of eastern Ladakh, a violent clash erupted between Chinese and Indian troops. In brutal hand-to-hand combat fought with sticks, stones, and improvised weapons, soldiers fell into icy rivers and off steep cliffs. It was the deadliest encounter between the two sides in decades. For the first time since 1975, lives were lost along the border. The Galwan clash shocked the world. It shattered the illusion that agreements alone could prevent violence. Nationalist sentiment surged in both countries. Troops were rushed to the border, artillery was positioned, and fighter jets roared overhead. Though full-scale war was avoided, the message was unmistakable. The China-India border conflict was not a relic of history. It was a living, dangerous reality. Today, tens of thousands of soldiers remain deployed along the line of actual control. Negotiations continue, but progress is slow. Each side accuses the other of aggression. Each prepares for the worst while hoping for stability. The Himalayas, once symbols of isolation and peace, have become one of the most militarized borders on Earth. And this is only the beginning of the story. To understand why this conflict truly threatens Asia, we must examine the military balance, nuclear implications, regional alliances, and the global consequences of a war between the world's two most populous nations.